My guest this evening, Professor Pedro Aguilera-Mellado. Great. Thank you. So Pedro is a professor of Spanish and Iberian Studies in the Department of Romance Languages and Literatures. He's concurrent faculty in Film Studies. He's a faculty fellow of the Nanovic Institute for European Studies and a faculty fellow of the Kellogg Institute for International Studies. His background, he achieved a bachelor's in philosophy and a master's in contemporary philosophy at the Universidad de Granada, before coming to the States and earning a master's and a PhD in Spanish literature from the University of Michigan, Ann Arbor, and he's been a professor at Notre Dame since 2018. Thank you so much for joining me, Pedro.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. I don't know if I'm a shy person, but I don't normally expose to these things. I do it, I teach, I make a living out of that, and I love it because it's my life and my passion. But thank you for inviting me, Seth, and to Steve also. And yeah, I come with perplexity, I guess, to talk and share.
Perfect. And we talked before, we're going to do a little bit of a format break this evening, in that the main topic Pedro and I want to discuss is how, as a humanist, you think about the Anthropocene and how we should respond to it artistically, philosophically, ethically. But because this concept is rooted in hard science, really, I was going to start by giving a short 5-minute intro on the science behind the Anthropocene and what the term means, and then we'll come back to discuss. But of course, if I get anything wrong or if you have something to add, please do. So a quick definition, which we're then going to unpack. The Anthropocene is the current geological period in which humans play a dominant role in steering the Earth's biosphere, climate, and geomorphology. So the Anthropocene is primarily a geological term, right? When we consider the deep history of planet Earth, the longest lasting evidence that we have comes from rocks, which have dynamically formed over the 4.5 billion year history of the planet. So geologists understand different time periods, understand the history of the Earth as defined by different compositions of the rock layers that are formed during those periods. For example, the Jurassic is probably a period you're familiar with. And so it's a geological term, and I want to briefly, but it involves a lot of different science, and I want to briefly contextualize the science by telling you about Earth and human history. So as we discussed, if you were here last spring with Professor Soja Dasgupta of biochemistry, life began quite soon after the Earth cooled down, about a couple 100 million years after the formation of the Earth. And on planet Earth, there was only one time that life stuck, at least. In that, you and I are related to literally every living thing on Earth currently. We have a common ancestor with every living being, every living cell. And so that makes us really deeply interconnected. And the development and proliferation of biology over these billions of years has had an enormous impact on the Earth many, many times over. For example, when the Earth was formed, there was no such thing as soil. Have you ever thought about this? The Earth forms, it's rocks, the gases of the atmosphere, and some water. But soil is really mainly a biological product over these billions of years. Likewise, coal and oil originate in accumulated remains of algae in plants and animals, as does limestone. So Earth has been changed in many ways, been affected in many ways by life. For maybe a really big qualitative change, let me just mention, the early Earth actually had very, very little oxygen in its atmosphere, about 1,000th of what we have today. And This changed around 2.5 billion years ago, or started to change around 2.5 billion years ago when some cousins of ours, some microscopic cyanobacteria, developed photosynthesis that we're familiar with, produces oxygen, and gradually the level of oxygen in the water and then the air increased. And this event, called the Great Oxygenation Event, enormously, drastically changed the biosphere and the Earth system as a whole. Geologically, we see the appearance of oxygenic materials in the rock formations. But of course, many of the living things at that time were could not handle oxygenic environments, and so it was a huge mass extinction as well. So much more to the present, for the past millions of years, humans have shaped our habitats in various ways. We have used tools starting around 3 million years ago. This was our ancestor Homo habilis. By 1 or 2 million years ago, our ancestor Homo erectus had control of fire, some form of language was spreading out into Africa, and from Africa into Eurasia, certainly affecting the habitats they lived in. More recently, about 100,000 years ago, the latest out of Africa movement occurred. Our ancestors, unless you are African, your ancestors, in this period, left Africa and encountered other human species that had left Africa earlier than us, the Neanderthals, the Denisovans, other human species. Of course, we interbred with them. And in this time, humans are using fire for landscape management. They're hunting large mammals to extinction, and these effects have sped up enormously in the last 10 to 15,000 years as distinct groups, independently in different places around the world, invented agriculture. And we see them, we shape biology through the domestication of plants and animals. We've been a leading force of predation, and done overhunting and overfishing, and we've done some amount of environmental regulation. But very recently, as in the last 100 years or so, we've played a much more dominant role in biogeography. We have turned enormous amounts of land into farmland. We raise enormous numbers of cattle and other animals on it for meat. We've removed huge amounts of coal from the earth and burned it. Of course, one distinctive geological signature of this period will be an enormous amount of plastics that appear all over the world. As we've understood, microplastics have been a huge force recently. We move more sediment and rock annually than all of the rivers in the world combined, and we're in the middle now of the 6th mass extinction caused by humans both directly from overhunting, overfishing on very large scales, but indirectly by many adverse effects we've had to different biomes. We have anthropogenic climate change, we see destruction of wetlands, deforestation, ocean acidification, the destruction of many critical habitats. So this is a situation, as I see it, we're in today, where the effects of humans on Earth have qualitatively changed. They've become clearly negative for the Earth system, and they threaten severe biological Earth system effects unless our behavior changes drastically into the future. And that brings us to our discussion today. If humans have become now a geological force on the same level perhaps of volcanoes or asteroids in shaping the Earth, how does that realization change how we should think about ourselves, how we should understand humanity, the art we make, the politics we have? So the big questions that we'll get at maybe gradually. But I wanted to start by asking Pedro about your personal journey. As I said, with background in philosophy and then Spanish literature, can you tell us a bit about how you became interested in Anthropocene studies, and briefly how you approach the topic, which we'll talk about a bunch later as well.
Thank you, Sam. That was quite a
Sorry, maybe it was too much.
Cosmos and
it's a big topic.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Can I ask for something? Can we turn off these lights, or that would be weird?
I can
It takes a little while to get used to it. Yeah.
I can dim it a little bit.
Yeah.
Just like this, I don't see you very well.
Yeah, let me try dim it.
Every time I try to look at you for like...
Yeah, and we want to be really close up to the microphone
Yes.
if you can.
So, I guess there are two ways to respond to that. One is a little the path at the beginning and my own biographical path and how I entered into philosophy, and then more recently, over the last years. Super quick, I grew up in a rural town in southern Spain, deeply Catholic. And it was okay until I was 15, 16 years old, and I said, this is not for me. And then when I was 18, I moved to Granada, which at that time, Granada is a middle-sized city in Spain. It's a college town. That for me was like New York or something like that. At that time, it was full of poets and places like this, which is amazing, with jazz and community and all of that. I'm not sure which one of the two, but people say that they normally enter philosophy because of, meaning in terms of authors, Nietzsche or Marx. And basically, in my years in Granada and also after, there are three authors that really talked to me in a way, which were Nietzsche, Marx, and Freud, in many different ways. But they are known to be, and again, we will need to talk into details, but broadly speaking, Nietzsche said the human, the Homo sapiens, human cannot put up with the brute force of existence that Seth has explained very well. So we need to create narratives that veil them. And that's what he called nihilism, in the sense of negating that there is nothingness, we die. And at the same time, nihilism in the sense of who cares, so we create our narratives, from religions to political ideas to soccer teams that we follow, to make life meaningful for us, right? And kind of like forget a little bit that we're going to kick the bucket at the end. Marx, well, for many, many things, said that we turned existence, what Seth described very well, being, things as we relate to them, as value, which I think is so important for the Anthropocene, where we are at. And then third, Freud said that contrary to what modern thought proposed, that we are rational beings, fundamentally conscious, which later on led to the birth of liberalism. We are in a country that is one of the birthplaces of liberal ideas. We have special, we are a species, but we have special gifts or powers, right? Autonomy, agency, ration, reason, whose use will make us free and strong. So Freud said there's an amazing, of all the texts, and there's this beyond the pleasure principle, in which he says something that Plato said in ancient Greece in different ways, but similar. The history of the human condition is struggling always between eros, love and creation, art, and thanatos, which is destruction, death. And unfortunately, Freud said, our civilization is not able to contain or deal with the destructive force underlying us, under us. We create culture to hopefully help that, so we don't kill each other, so we don't destroy things. Yet Freud, in that article, it's from the late teens, early 20s, in the 20th century, said, we don't have really the tools to overcome that death drive. So Nietzsche, Marx, Freud, so those are authors that create then different influences in the 20th century until the present, of course. There are many others, and as any thinker, they're limited in many ways. They're contradictory. They're imperfect as we all are. But dealing with all of those authors, kind of, it's how I entered the Anthropocene in a way, because what they were saying is what then science for a long time, but especially in 2000 when there's a famous moment. I don't know if I can talk about that. How long do we have? But what do you think?
So the origination of the term, you mean?
Yeah, when Paul Crutzen.
Yeah, sure.
Like, I don't know how long do you want to say. It will be fine if it's more like an exchange instead of me. But anyway, so super quick. So Paul Crutzen, Nobel Prize in chemistry, and studied the atmosphere. There was a very famous summit of scientists in Mexico, in Cuernavaca, and they were talking about the Holocene, which is our previous geological epoch. And this Crutzen said, stop saying the Holocene. We are in the Anthropocene. We have altered, in certain parameters, irreversibly, the Earth systems. So this is where, I don't know if I explained myself well, but this is when all these three giants of thought, of Western thought, they are thinking in the West, but against the West, undoing the West, and undoing our assumptions. The Anthropocene is basically the confirmation that what these three thinkers were putting into words and ideas, science is now telling us. That we have mastered nature, that we have created narratives that prevent us to see what's going on. For example, spectacle, society of a spectacle. Think about Netflix or social networks and so on and so forth. And so that is kind of the, how can I think, enter the Anthropocene, I think.
Okay. Very interesting. A lot to think about. So I mean, you sort of just guided this, but as you described, what's very interesting about the Anthropocene as a topic is that scientists and humanists work on this together. And I think in one of your course syllabi that I was able to find, you talk about this concept of bearing witness to the Anthropocene. I was hoping you could tell us what that concept means, and also, I guess, how it is that, or what sort of the human truths are that literature, art about the Anthropocene can capture that isn't just in the data of some scientific report.
Think about it.
Yeah.
So bearing witness, Socrates has this famous saying that I think everyone knows that says, life without examination is not worth living. Jacques Derrida, which is, I think, is one of the most fundamental thinkers of the West, although he was born in Algeria, but grew up in France and studied French thought, in a very important book from the late 90s called Spectres of Marx, starts the book saying, I have the exordium if we want to read it later, we have time. I like to learn to live finally. And from that thought, I like to learn to live finally. He said, finally how, finally. And from there, he just basically unfolds the entire book. So, being witness for me means acknowledging that we are not up to the task of how knowledge and humanity is, able to deal with this predicament that today's event is called the existential predicament of the Anthropocene, and this is very important because the Anthropocene is not a problem that we can solve, which is what our technical Western mentality wants us to do right away. Close up the question and say, yes, we'll find this technology in California that will fix it for us. Unfortunately, that's not going to be the case. It's not a problem. There are many layers under the Anthropocene, which connects to what Seth was saying so well, which with the discovery of the Anthropocene, or a scientific demonstration of the Anthropocene, what we're dealing with is that there's no human knowledge that is enough either. And that we move from talking about the Earth or even ecology to Earth systems or Earth sciences, meaning we need several disciplines to negotiate this because it affects many things. For those in the humanities, or the so-called humanities, which is also a very questionable and debatable notion, there is this post-colonial thinker originally from India called Dipesh Chakrabarti, who says that culture is the non-coercive rearrangement of desire. You know, like force, the law, police, if you don't do what you should, they're going to come and get you. Or even if you do what you should, they're going to come and get you. But culture or thought or literature of arts, always, unless they're pure spectacle, but even if they're just pure show, are trying to present things or represent things and show how we desire in a way, right? And what the Anthropocene is telling, I think, to those in the humanities and cultural studies, is that we are putting our desire, we're willing things that are destructive towards nature and towards ourselves. We live in the time of anxiety. Anxiety is probably the mood of the Anthropocene, and it's for a reason. It's because we live, with caffeine and rushing and being productive. The two main words or verbs of the Anthropocene probably are producing and consuming, and back again. Producing, consuming, and producing. So in my classes to the students, the new generation, I try to tell them, unfortunately, this is the bad news. After all the development, especially in the 20th century, which things got really crazy, especially in the US, the second half of the 20th century, where the standards of living, not for everyone, but they increase in ways that were unprecedented. Mostly because of plastic, cars, there's so many things that were unthinkable. You guys know much better than me. My parents don't know too. For younger generations, it's like, oh, so we came to the party, we kind of late. Because now, if we aspire to consume and produce and travel as much as they did, some people do, or they've been doing, especially in the last 20 or 30 years, we know that we are killing species to begin with. Or traveling and then coming back and being tired after vacations, which is another thing today. We have vacations and we can be tired. So anyway, that's what I would.
Okay, there's much in that for me to respond to it and push on further. One aspect that maybe I was a little bit surprised you were saying, but you can tell me I've taken the wrong meaning. It sounds like you're grounding the predicaments of the Anthropocene really in the roots of human nature, with the thinkers you brought up. And so how much do you think this sort of predicament was really an inevitability as a result of who we are as animals, versus how much do you think this is the result of particular choices or cultural philosophical movements such as capitalism?
Wow, what a question. But it helps a lot, Seth, to answer something, which is the distinction between physics and metaphysics.
Sure.
In the sense that I don't think we got here because it was inevitable, and I don't think that we're going to extinguish and that's inevitable. One of the things that I very carefully try to do is to prevent us from apocalyptic narratives that speak from the end. You know, I think it's very interesting, however, that movies before will portray aliens coming to the Earth and they were the problem. And lately, if you see all the mainstream movies about this, are a little different. Because now they don't portray the other as a problem, but ourselves. And that changes a little more and more. It's very telling, or symptomatic, I think, about our time. But the Anthropocene was inevitable because the history of Western thought is the history of a mistake. In the sense that since Greek philosophy, which, as always, philosophy is a discussion of authors that read each other and move forward ideas and try to be witness to their times that are always similar yet different and unique. And since, especially Aristotle, which is probably the most influential philosopher of the West, there's this discipline called metaphysics that I'll argue now is extinguished. But Aristotle said, you know, there are physis, which is what in Greek say physis, nature. Nature is the Roman word, physics is the Greek word. Physis is a being that it's evolving in itself. Seth explained it so well. He gave you all chronology and that is physics. Metaphysics is a predication, it's affirmations, conceptualizations, categorizations that we humans create to name physics. That is the metaphysics. The meta also means that even before the three big religions, in Greek thought, there was the Greek thought paved the way for a foundational thinking that thought from the very beginning, this is at the heart of the West, ultimately related to nationalism and many other problems or questions, which is that not only we name things thinking that we believe what they are, that we say this is a tree and we think we know what we're talking about, which actually we don't, because the tree doesn't care that we call it a tree, except that we cut it and produce it for ourselves. So this metaphysical, the history of the Western thought is the history of metaphysics, is the history of different understandings of being, of naming things, idealism, empiricism, Marxism, liberalism, I don't know, all of the different trends of the history of thought, or epochs, right? But also the thing about metaphysics is that it kind of somehow always assumes that there is a foundational principle, whatever that's God or good or Plato, or there are different interpretations of the history of thought. So I'm trying to see how this connects to your question. But I'll say that summing up this history of metaphysics, the question of why is inevitable. To the extent that we keep naming things, the way we name them now mostly are Wall Street, cybernetics, artificial intelligence. Those are the predominant ways in which we humans now name things, in the sense that they are more effective on a planetary scale, right? Like in other words, and this is when it gets a little confusing and we can maybe, I don't know if you may agree or not with this, but what at least philosophers think nowadays is that we live in a technical world. In other words, that we are mostly technological civilization, or some will say techno-capitalistic civilization. So that technological mind, not the technologies that we have, but the technical mind, meaning we relate to being as a problem to solve. It's our own tomb. It's is how we are caving our own tomb.
What?
Our own tomb.
Tomb.
Tomb, sorry. Grave, yeah, grave. Right?
Yeah.
Thank you. In the sense that we have forgotten being, existence, physics, because we have veiled it with metaphysics. So metaphysics, I'm sure when you listen, you hear to the word metaphysics, you think about religion or something spiritual. Actually, in the history of philosophy, it is that, but technology is the ultimate metaphysics. And certainly the most violent of all of them. That's why we live in the most sophisticated technological times ever, in terms of the humankind, and yet we are farther and farther to deal with the Anthropocene. Because again, the Anthropocene is not a technical problem to resolve. It is a it's a existential epochal. Anthropocene is the theme of our epoch. All of that, the war against resources, the birth or rebirth of fascisms, which connect to the Anthropocene, and we can talk about that on our societies, or these discourses of hatred. All of this is connected in many ways to how we neglect, overlook, or veil with different mechanisms daily our finitude and the finitude of the planet through metaphysics, through naming things, through spectacle.
Interesting. Okay, there's a lot in that. I also a bit surprising. Tell me if I'm interpreting wrong. It sounded like you were sort of taking a advocating a position that I advocate, but sort of think of as radical. That the mistake was thinking that there's something other than the physical reality. That there's some, for example, a telos or that these metaphysical things terms people use have deep importance rather than that physics is really, in some sense, all there is. Is that in the lines of what you were saying, or can you say again? What is the mistake that the history of Western thought is based on?
That we think we know what we're talking about.
In
other words, and this is a quote by one of the foundational poems of Greek thought by Parmenides, who says, unfortunately, I won't, by memory I won't, but it says something like, mortals, Greek used to call humans mortals. Then came Christianity in modern times. Christianity said, we are not mortals, no, we are immortals. And modern thought translated that and said, we're going to be immortals through technology. That's the last 500 years of modern times. So Parmenides says, mortals have named things, trusting them to be true, but they don't understand that things change and the colors change and the river, the water runs, and it's not the same always.
So is that not a distinction between like an empirical worldview, worldview based in empiricism versus a worldview based in just abstract thought?
Yeah. So the relationship between physics and metaphysics?
Or what you see as this big mistake. I mean, some...
Yeah. I mean, there is a word for that in the history of Marxism called ideology, meaning that we relate to reality. You know, like let's say I work for a company, I make $7 an hour, and I go every day and say, I'm so free, I'm so happy. There's a word for that called ideology, which is you're not seeing that you've been exploited. So that relates to metaphysics. Metaphysics, ideology, is not into the task of what's going on, you know. For example, many people know climate change, or some people will know it, some will deny it, but our relationship to the Earth is climate change. Climate change is just the tip of the iceberg, or it's a tiny part of the predicament of the Anthropocene. And climate change, actually, normally when we talk about climate change, we talk in anthropocentric terms. Like it's a problem for us, as if nature will care about us. You know, if we extinguish, physics will continue. We don't know. I have no idea how. Or maybe not. I don't know. Maybe Seth could talk about that. But I'm saying it's always the anxiety of the nihilism of making sure that we close up the question right away because we're scared, because we're afraid of meeting mortality or finitude.
Right. Okay. So going back to, responding to that, and what you were saying earlier, we are in a period of anxiety, especially young people. There's certainly this phenomenon of, I don't know what it's termed, but yeah, climate or doomerism. And so, can you say where you, how that interplays with the effort of discussing or abstractly discussing the Anthropocene in literature or film? Do you see, is that a tool just to help people understand the current situation, or should it also be a tool for helping us personally respond to this in a way that doesn't make us need Prozac?
Which is another symptom. No?
Mm.
You know, so I think there are two levels, Seth, if I understood correctly. One is a political level, political not as institutional, political as we are all since the Greek, since Greek thought we are all political animals, if we're humans.
If we're primates.
If we're primates. So the question is how, I give my students a list of things that we can do right away. Decarbonize, use less cars, have fewer cars, travel less, not eat meat, not recycle but reduce any footprint. There are concrete political things that we know on a micro scale and big scale, which are regulations, Now, about the doom, you say doom?
Doomerism.
Doomerism.
Okay.
I mean, for me, the other layer is, in a way, we're not being doomerist enough. In the sense that this generation, at least my experience teaching or sharing the notion of the Anthropocene is, we are not talking about being sustainable like in the 90s. This is different. So, in other words, for me, there's two layers. One is the political solutions or the daily quotidian solutions. There is another layer to it, which is trying to understand the root of the problems. And I know that we tend to think either we don't care or we have practical solutions for climate problems, or then if we're too doomerist, then we are not being effective. I also think that it's very powerful to dwell or linger on the questions that the Anthropocene mean. I'm talking now about college students that have the gift to, for a little time at least, before they join the workforce, think about these things. And not thinking quickly and thinking, okay, there is A and B, but thinking as deeper as one can try to do it. which is, again, the difference between climate change and sustainability versus the Anthropocene, for example. And the last thing, like, we read this semester, we read a book on energy and renewable energies, and that book offers an amazing map of each one of the renewable energies and say their great benefits and their limits. But ultimately, this is a physics expert like you, researcher from Barcelona.
Oh.
And he says, you're asking physics experts something impossible. The way you live, there's no physics that can solve this problem. This is the thing. It's not the problem of the Anthropocene is not a problem of knowledge, in my opinion, or my understanding. It's not a problem of knowledge, it's not a problem of information, which are fundamental, because unfortunately many people won't have access to this information, or will doubt it, or we know that. Or even what the science says, because even if we know the sciences, we can say, who cares? Who cares? So it's not about information only, it's not about knowledge only, it's about wisdom. It's about how we put in a hierarchy that knowledge and that information to learning how to live. In other words, why I may be happier if I don't buy every single day a package from Amazon. Instead of aspiring that my happiness and my desire depends on that action that is absolutely insane in terms of the Earth systems, for many reasons. So this is a concrete thing, I think.
So where do you see Anthropocene art as coming into this? Because I know you think a lot about film and literature. I guess you say it's not really a problem of just brute information, but can art help us get people to feel this deeply, to understand what's really going on, yeah.
I in a personal search to hopefully find that, as an expert on Iberian studies on a field, I'm trying to find contemporary works of literature, or film, or arts in general, that are trying to tackle this through the arts, and they're trying to use their imagination and thought to push how we see these issues beyond, not as a problem of sustainability or climate change, but as an anthropocenic problem that is much more deeper. And there's some, but like all of us, I think at least me, we're late to the task. There's some, but it's not like it's, again, I'm in a search.
I see. So you think this is a useful avenue for artists to pursue, but it's not currently, there isn't really a formed genre of Anthropocene art yet, which there should be. Yeah.
I don't think so, because, and the reason for this, I'm not saying that there is no art that is related to this. In Thanksgiving, I went to see Begonia. I don't know if you watched that movie. It's very disturbing. It's called Begonia. So it's with Emma Stone, and it's kind of it's a movie in a way about the Anthropocene. And it's in the mainstream movie theaters, all the way to independent cinematography or literature that is not mainstream. But the thing about the Anthropocene, and this maybe sound a little weird, but the reason why I think there is not like overwhelming literature or arts or music, or although there is also a lot of music about this, is because the Anthropocene, connecting to the philosophers that I was saying before, means facing an entirely other, and an entirely other to us, that we, in my opinion, cannot or should not rush to define in the sense of domesticating it, as we've done previously with political ideas, with religions, with, it is entirely other in the sense that it certainly overwhelms any human life, because this is a predicament that no one can solve. And if you understand thoroughly, you know that what science is saying is that we cannot change the Anthropocene. We can make it shorter and not as deep. But my understanding, and you know the science of the 9 parameters of Earth sciences, 6 or 7 have been irreversibly altered by human agency on Earth. So it's not that there are hurricanes, more hurricanes in Florida, or cold rain intensively in the Mediterranean in southern Spain, where I'm from. It's an epochal change that doesn't belong anymore to the history of the human, like the fall of the Berlin Wall, or this president, or this war. Is an epochal shift that changes the fact that we were, if we ever were, but now less than ever, in control of history. Because the house in which we make history, which is the Earth, we have compromised it irreversibly in many ways.
In what sense are you using the term other there? What is the other? Is it just, you mean the large-scale effects of ourselves and what we've done over the last decades that are other to each of us because we can't control them? Was that the right interpretation? I mean, there's a very human problem or predicament that we've gotten ourselves into.
I mean, when I meant the other, I meant it in the sense that it's not. We can ask. I will ask. Is the Anthropocene a crisis or a problem? Will you agree with that scientifically?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, as you've said, it's certainly for an individual, it's not a problem we can solve. It's some sort of crisis for the Earth system. I think I'd agree.
Okay. I mean, when I said the other, I meant it exposes us to the most uncanny and disquiet and unknown and shaky, murky experience as humans.
I see.
In the sense that even if you read what should you do to fight the Anthropocene, let's say, right? To prevent it, to shorten it, to not to aggravate it. You can read a checklist of 10 points and you can do them, you can share them with your friends. And I think we should. I'm trying in my possibilities, but we know that we've been for so many decades living way ahead of our possibilities, over the physical limits of the Earth, that I think it's the only word that comes is abyssal, ABYSSAL. Tectonic shift, if we can use a Earth metaphor. That we've been destroying nature for a long time. We have had crises for many times, but the fact that we have altered some of the basic parameters of the Earth systems, that only one species is moving towards the 6th mass extinction, which is unique before mass extinctions happens for different reasons, not because one species induced it, which we're doing now. And then there is another layer, and this is maybe a little polemical, but maybe with all my respect, we can share this and we can discuss this. So there is this MUBI platform of film and series, among the so many. It's a Netflix, but I'll say the good one, but it's like more critical, and there is a series about Benito Mussolini, the Italian fascist dictator. And it's very perturbing. And I'm sorry, I'm going to deviate for 1 minute, but go back to the Anthropocene. And it's very eloquent. I teach classes on fascism, how it happened in Spain, how democracy was thwarted through violence, and for 40 years, almost half a century, Spain was a dictatorship in the 20th century. There's a moment in which, I think it's episode 3 of the series, I really recommend the show. It's 8 episodes only, and it's called The Son of a Century, and it shows how Mussolini started in a newspaper and how he became to power and everything. And there are many moments that are very telling, I think, about our time. There are I will say two sentences that for me was like, oof. One, Mussolini explicitly says we need to turn their fear into hatred. Number 2, he says, we need to bring life back to the subject, to the human. This is a fascist, one-on-one fascist speaking. And I think this is where fascism and Anthropocene connects today. In the sense that we can talk about non-historic fascism or post-fascism or whatever, but in the sense that all this naturalization of hatred that we live in, as if it was another discourse that was okay, in my humble understanding, connects to the neglect or the nihilism, that's the philosophical word, in other words, our unwillingness to care truly about things, or to use narratives that keep us entertained and cover what's going on, whatever if it's violence among us, or the Anthropocene as the epochal, I think, determining, our determining fact of our times, which is what we have done to Mother Earth. So yeah, I don't know, it is provocative, but I think there is a connection there between this nostalgic will to, and that's why I mentioned the other, to bring back. The problem is that we thought from the beginning that life belonged to us. This is the problem. And it's embedded in the history of religions and philosophy. Technology is not only, it's just only an attempt to master life. To think that we can master being and existence and physics. And when we have messed with that so much, that nature now is saying, you have not listened to me. And this has been said by Native Americans and non-Western thought for millennia. But I also want to say that in the history of Western thought, there is also criticism inside of us that is questioning that from within. I mentioned Marx, Nietzsche, and Freud, but there are many others.
Right. Again, a lot to think about in what you said. And I have lots more questions, but maybe I should limit myself to just one more brief question before we take some questions from the audience. Touching on some of the things you were just talking about, you are primarily a scholar of Iberian studies, and so I was hoping you could talk just a little about if there's distinctive effects of the predicaments of the Anthropocene on Iberia in particular, or if there's distinctive Iberian thought about these puzzles. Maybe that connects to fascism.
I think there are two answers. Sorry.
Yes and no.
I'm congested too, by the way, sorry. And I don't have much voice normally. So those two things, I'm so sorry. And my accent, of course. I want to apologize for that because I have accent. So, it's Spain. I mean, Spain is particularly affected within the European context because in the southeast there is a desert. It's the only western area of Europe that has a desert. Almeria is tiny, and it's the country. I think 40% of the country is at risk of becoming desert in whatever, I don't know how many decades. So yes, it is more exposed, but within the European context. But Europe has not been the center of the world for a long time. No, I will argue the Atlantic is not the center of the world as it used to be in the 20th century. No, the world is now, so kind of who cares about Europe in a way, in the sense that, and I'm gonna try to explain what I think is like. It's the case of Spain interests me because it's my field, but again, this is a problem that goes beyond any nation or identity. But, however, I always emphasize in my classes, I hate to say that, I always emphasize in my classes, Spain is at the heart of what Marx called primitive accumulation. When the European monarchies, crowns, in the name of the human, and civilization came to the Americas 500 years ago, and Spain was leading that, the beginning of the extraction of minerals, the beginning, not that it was the first time, the Roman Empire did it too, and many times before. But one can argue, and there is a debate about the Anthropocene and other names to it, that it doesn't start in 1950 with the nuclear testing and mass consumerism and travel and society of spectacle and TV, which is fundamental too. And, there are different timelines, no? But Spain has a particular responsibility or entry to understand the Anthropocene because it is what Marx called primitive accumulation, meaning expolium, the raw, the steel of the Native American people, their genocide of most of them systematically, came hand in hand with the expoliation of the resources that was at the base and the foundation of markets and banking in modern Europe later on. That gold and that silver and all that, So it's important to know that, but I'm not a scholar of early modern times. I'm not a specialist in that. I know some of that, but it's not my, But yeah, other than that, I don't study this because I'm worried about what's going to happen to Spain.
Interesting. Thank you.